Well, good morning and good afternoon. Just before I forget, or in case I do forget, next week Sarah McClellan will be giving a Way Seeking Mind talk. She is Sangha member in Santa Cruz and part of Twining Vines as well. She did Jukai a while ago now, but I thought it would be good for her to give a Way Seeking Mind talk. So next week she'll be giving the talk. So it's good to support our Sangha members when they tell the story, how they came to the Dharma. So I hope you can all attend. Today I'd like to speak about fear. And this came about, someone in the Sangha sent me a chapter from a book called Fear by Thich Nhat Hanh. And the chapter is called A Time Before. And he speaks about fear in a way I haven't heard before. So I thought it was very beautiful. So I'll read from that today and make comments along the way. So reading from Thich Nhat Hanh here. Many of us don't remember this, but a long time ago we lived inside our mother's wombs. We were tiny living human beings. There were two hearts inside our mother's body, her own heart and our heart. During this time your mother did everything for you. She breathed for you, ate for you, drank for you. You were linked to her through your umbilical cord. Oxygen and food came to you through the umbilical cord, and you were safe and content inside your mother. You were never too hot or too cold. You were very comfortable. You rested on a soft cushion made of water. In China and Vietnam, we call the womb the palace of the child. You spent about 9 months in the palace. The 9 months you spent in the womb were some of the most pleasant times of your life. Then the day of your birth arrived. Everything felt different around you, and you were thrust into a new environment. You felt cold and hungry for the first time. Sounds were too loud, lights were too bright. For the first time we felt afraid. This is the original fear. Inside the palace of the child, you didn't need to use your own lungs. But at the moment of your birth, someone cut the umbilical cord, and you were no longer physically joined with your mother. Your mother could no longer breathe for you. You had to learn how to breathe on your own for the first time. If you couldn't breathe on your own, you would die. Birth was an extremely precarious time. You were pushed out of the palace and you encountered suffering. You tried to inhale, but it was difficult. There was some liquid in your lungs, and to breathe in, you had to first push out that liquid. We were born, and with that birth, our fear was born along with the desire to survive. This is the original desire. So we don't talk this way in Zen very often, speaking so intimately about the body and about babies and umbilical cords. But I think it is a beautiful thing to reflect on, a delicate thing to reflect on. That shift from being in the security of the womb to being outside. And having had 3 children myself, I was fortunate enough to have been able to home birth them all and have kind of say over how things happened. One of the things I realized in my reading during all of those times was how often in modern society we cut the umbilical cord very, very quickly. The baby is born and the umbilical cord still providing oxygenated blood to the baby for quite a long time. I can't remember how many minutes it is, but it's sort of something like 10 or 15 minutes. It's quite a long time. And in many cultures before modern medicine, that cord was not cut until quite a bit later. The baby would be born, and not until it had latched onto the mother's breast, until it had reconnected with the mother in a new way, and oxygen was still flowing through the cord. And what actually happens is when the baby latches to the breast, a message is sent to the placenta to say, you're no longer needed. And then the placenta detaches from the inside of the womb and the oxygenated blood stops flowing into the baby. So there's this natural order of things that the baby is supposed to reconnect and be firmly attached again to the mother before the umbilical cord is severed. But that's not how it's done often in modern medical times for all the various reasons that is so. And I think in a way it is emblematic of a culture that values independence over interdependence. That as soon as the baby comes out, boom, cut that cord, separate it from the mother. I think there is a trend now back towards waiting a little longer, which is good in Western countries. So reading again from Thich Nhat Hanh. As infants, each of us knew that to survive, we had to get someone to take care of us. Even after our umbilical cord was cut, we still had to rely entirely on adults to survive. When you depend on someone or something else to survive, it means there is a link, a kind of an invisible umbilical cord that is still there between you and them. When we grow up, our original fear and original desire are still there. Although we know we are no longer babies, we still fear that we cannot survive, that no one will take care of us. Every desire we will have in our lives has its root in this original fundamental desire to survive. Everyone is afraid sometimes. We fear loneliness, being abandoned, growing old, dying, and being sick, among many other things. Sometimes we may feel fear without knowing exactly why. If we practice looking deeply, we see that this fear is the result of that original fear from the time we were newborns, helpless and unable to do anything for ourselves. Even though we have grown into adults, that original fear and original desire are both still alive. Our desire to have a partner is, in part, a continuation of our desire for someone to take care of us. And I think part of our task as we mature is to recognize how we do need to be taken care of and to look after that and make sure that our needs are taken care of. But also to slightly shift the compass, slightly shift toward putting our attention towards caring for others. You know, in a way you could say shifting from the baby to the mother. Slowly shifting into the role of being the one that cares for, rather than the one that is cared for. It's always going to be both, but I do think it's a sign of a kind of a maturity when we can shift our attention more toward providing that umbilical link for others and being a little less concerned about that umbilical link for ourselves. Continuing reading again. For most of us, our original fear continues in some form. Sometimes we might feel scared of being alone. We may feel that alone I can't make it. I have to have somebody. This is a continuation of our original fear. If we look deeply, however, we will find that we have the capacity to calm our fear and find our own happiness. And I was thinking a little about loneliness. And sometimes, just to share, sometimes I miss my son who lives in America. I miss him a lot because he and I are very, very close. Kind of like a lot of stories you hear of single mothers and sons having a very close bond where the son really respects and appreciates that the mother raised them, and the mother really appreciates and respects the way their child conducts their life. So sometimes I miss him. We talk so naturally and easily together, and now we can only do that virtually. We don't get to do it in person. But rather than letting that turn into a fear that could start to kind of constrict, or it can be constricting, I try just to be gentle with it and go, aren't I lucky to have someone to miss so much? You know, what a beautiful thing. And to be kind to the feeling of melancholy itself, to be friendly with that little melancholy feeling of missing him. Oh, hello, melancholy friend, you've come to visit me. So we can sort of transform something as it tips towards fear. We can gently kind of embrace it so that it doesn't escalate into something that then becomes difficult to manage. And this next section is why I particularly love this chapter. We have to look deeply to identify the original primal fear and desire that are behind so many of our behaviours. Every one of the fears and desires that you have today is a continuation of your original fear and desire. One day I was walking and I felt something like an umbilical cord linking me to the sun in the sky. I saw very clearly that if the sun was not there, I would die right away. Then I saw an umbilical cord linking me to the river. I knew that if the river wasn't there, I would also die because there would be no water for me to drink. And I saw an umbilical cord linking me to the forest. The trees in the forest were creating oxygen for me to breathe. Without the forest, I would die. And I saw an umbilical cord linking me to the farmer who grows the vegetables, the wheat, the rice that I cook to eat. When you practice meditation, you begin to see things that other people do not see. Although you don't see all these umbilical cords, they are there, linking you to your mother, your father, the farmer, the sun, the river, the forest, and so on. Meditation can include visualization. If you want to draw a picture of yourself with these many umbilical cords, you would soon discover that there are not only 5 or 10, but maybe hundreds or thousands of them, and you are linked to them all. So again, I think this is a rather unusual image in Zen, to think of umbilical cords linking us to things. But it's also very poetic and beautiful to think of it that way. Because it is actually our original experience in the womb. Nobody doesn't get born that way. Whether it's cesarean section or natural birth, there's the umbilical cord. So we can look out and feel that same appreciation, interdependence, that opposite of loneliness, that in fact deep, deep connectedness that we have with it. That would alleviate fears that we may have, because fear almost by definition is a constriction around the individual self. Although I do think we can feel fear for others, we can feel fear on their behalf. which I'm going to speak about in a moment. But fear tends to isolate us. So this image of the umbilical cord, I think, can be very helpful to us, to remind us that we're not alone, even if it might feel that way. And that whatever fears we have, there's support out there for us. We can reach out, get that umbilical cord, and go along it to whatever's at the other end and get support. And I think part of that process of being friendly towards our fear is to not focus so much on the content of the thought itself, but more on the feeling of the fear, and to think of that feeling as it arises as a friend that wants attention. It's this friend that wants attention. This fear has arisen, and we can be friendly towards it, rather than getting too involved in all the details of the actual fear. And that also becomes almost like a companion right there. We have this companion, a melancholy companion, a lonely companion, a scared companion. And another thought that I had about raising children and modern society is that we tend to live in modern society in enclosed environments that are they don't have a lot of sentient life in them. They have a lot of objects that are not alive. They have their own kind of aliveness, but it's not like the world outside of our homes or the world outside of buildings. And when I raised my older children, we were living on a permaculture farm off the grid, and they spent their daytime mostly outdoors. I would put a blanket out under a tree, and they would lie there and see the dappled sunlight coming through the leaves. And that was like, we tend to have a crib with a mobile above it that turns around, and that's what entertains a child a lot of the time. But this, I think, is a much more wholesome way, is to have just the dappled sunlight. I remember seeing my daughter lying there and looking at the sun moving between the branches, the broken up light, and how she was captivated by it. And then a leaf would fall and she would fiddle with it. And a chicken might come up. And we had chickens and geese and donkeys and goats and all the usual sorts of farm animals. And they would come up to her, and once they were older, they would run around and chase them. They interacted in the vegetable garden, picking peas and tomatoes and beans, little baby cucumbers, and chewing on them. So they were interacting. It's like the umbilical cords were more obvious with living beings. But we probably most of us, didn't get raised that way. So in a lot of ways, I think we need just to step out the door more often. We just need to step out the door to where there's other life. I wanted to share a dream I had last night, because there were 3 fears in the dream. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Obviously, I had the dream in some part because of today's talk. So in the dream, a senior teacher and I were leading a sesshin, a retreat. And during one of the breaks, we needed to go move a car that needed to be moved for some reason. So off we went, and we had our robes on. And when we got to the car, the area was completely flooded. And as many of you know, we've had these huge floods in Australia, so that came through in the dream. So the car was floating in the water, and this other teacher and I had to kind of get into the water and to steer the car and find a spot for it. So we did do that. But that took some time, and I suspected that I was not going to get back to the zendo until right on the dot of the time for sitting, or maybe even a few minutes late. So the first fear in the dream was a sympathetic fear. In the dream, I was thinking, my Sangha members know that I'm very punctual. So if I get there a little bit late, they'll worry. They'll be slightly confused and worried. And so I had this sympathetic fear for them. And then also in the dream, a senior student had given the Dharma talk in the morning, but hadn't finished. And I'd suggested, well, you could also finish and give a Dharma talk in the afternoon so that you can finish the talk. But while I was out with this senior teacher, he didn't know that we had made this arrangement, and he said to me, I'd love to give the talk this afternoon. And because of the appropriateness of our relationship, I said, of course, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So then the second fear was, I'm going to get back to the Zendo just on time or even late and need to whisper to the senior student that they won't be able to give their talk. And so then I had another sympathetic fear that they might feel slightly embarrassed and also a little confused that there was a last-minute schedule change and a little disappointment. And then the last fear that happened in the dream was that in the process of moving that car with my robes on, my zagu, my bowing mat, had got completely wet. And when the doshi, the priest, folds out the bowing mat in the middle of the zendo, it unfolds in a particular way and it gets refolded in a particular way, and the fabric develops a memory. You can see, I don't know if you can see the zagu there in the camera, but there's folds in the zagu that are, the fabric remembers the fold. And it makes it easier to unfold and fold it up because it's already there in the fabric. So my zagu was completely wet and I couldn't remember how to fold it because there were no fold marks. And so I just went, I'll just have to fold it somehow. So I folded it the way one would fold a towel, which I knew was not the correct way. But nevertheless, that's what I did. So then the third fear in the dream was just a slightly more personal one, a sense of, I'm going to bow in the zendo and I won't be able to follow the proper form. I'm going to pull out this wet zagu and have to kind of undo it in a slightly awkward way. So a slight feeling of possible embarrassment that I wouldn't follow the form very well. But the reason I'm sharing this dream with you is two reasons. One, just that the dream gave examples of sympathetic fear to others, that we can fear on other people's behalf. And many people don't realize that a lot of people who have post-traumatic stress actually have post-traumatic stress not because of traumas that happen to them, but because of traumas that they witness or traumas that they cause. Like soldiers often have PTSD because of the traumas that they cause. So there's an empathic fear. So in the dream there was some of those. And then the other reason to mention it is even in the dream itself, I soothed myself in the dream. I said to myself in the dream, the Sangha members will be fine. We'll only be a few minutes late. Even if they're confused, it will only be for a few minutes. So I kind of diminished the fear for myself. And the senior Sangha member who was going to give a talk and might have felt a little disappointed, I was able to say to myself in the dream, they'll also be okay. It's not a big disappointment. We'll find a solution later. And with the third fear about the embarrassment with the wet zagu, I was able to say, it's fine. We kind of like each other being faulty. It's kind of nice. Don't worry about it. So our Dharma practice can continue into our dream life. Just in case you've never thought of that as a possibility. We practice during the day consciously, but when we continue to practice, it starts to flow into our dream world, and we practice in our dreams. So the last thing I'd like to mention is every day we chant the Heart Sutra, and the word fear is in our Heart Sutra. It says, with nothing to attain, a bodhisattva lives by prajna paramita, and thus the mind is without hindrance. Without hindrance, there is no fear. That's in our chanting that we do in the morning. Without hindrance, there is no fear. What is the primary hindrance? A belief in a separate self. A belief in a self that's not connected by umbilical cords infinitely across the universe. A self that's isolated. And then it goes on to say, far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. So that the primary inverted view is to feel that you are a separate being. And that's why I really like this sense that at birth, there shouldn't, ideally there should not be that moment of separation. The child should come out, latch to the mother, and only then have the cord cut. And that's really how life really is. There's never any moment of separation. It's always an interdependent life, every single moment. So I want to thank Thich Nhat Hanh for such a beautiful chapter about fear, such an unusual chapter.